At approximately 3:27 a.m., the 911 call center started receiving multiple 911 calls.
In the early hours of August 17th, 2025, the streets of Crown Heights, Brooklyn, still carried the echo of summer nightlife. Bars were closing, music spilled from passing cars, and the neighborhood was winding down after a Saturday night. But inside the Taste of the City lounge on Franklin Avenue, the night was far from over. What began as a typical evening of music, dancing, and laughter would soon descend into one of the deadliest incidents the city had seen in years. The lounge, popular for late-night gatherings, was packed with people in their 20s, 30s, and even older patrons who had come for a weekend escape. But just before 3:30 a.m., chaos broke out. According to investigators, an argument escalated inside the lounge. Voices rose above the music, the crowd's mood shifted, and in an instant, the night took a terrifying turn. Multiple gunmen opened fire, and the sound of gunshots tore through the building. Witnesses described the horrifying seconds as panic erupted. People ducked behind tables, others ran for the exits, and within moments, dozens of shell casings littered the floor. When the shooting finally stopped, the aftermath was devastating. 3 men lay fatally wounded, one just 27 years old, another 35, and a third whose age has not yet been released. 8 more victims, 5 men and 3 women, ranging in age from 27 to 61, were injured. Some had collapsed inside the lounge, others outside near the sidewalk where they tried to escape. Emergency calls flooded the NYPD dispatch. Within minutes, patrol cars and ambulances converged on Franklin Avenue. Officers rushed inside, finding the scene littered with casings and chaos. A firearm was recovered nearby, abandoned as the shooters fled the scene. Despite the fast response, the perpetrators were gone. Paramedics worked quickly to stabilize the wounded. Stretchers were rolled out, victims were rushed to local hospitals, and family members began receiving the calls that no one ever wants to hear. Detectives arriving on scene quickly realized this wasn't a single-gun incident. At least 36 shell casings were recovered, suggesting multiple shooters. Surveillance footage was pulled from both inside the lounge and surrounding businesses. Still, as of those early morning hours, no suspects were in custody. For the Crown Heights community, it was a shocking blow. Brooklyn has a long history of resilience, but in 2025, shootings had been at record lows across New York City. NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch herself later noted that the year had been the safest in decades when it came to gun violence. And yet, on this night, tragedy struck in a way that reminded everyone of the fragility of safety. As daylight broke, Franklin Avenue was no longer the lively nightlife strip it had been hours earlier. Instead, it became a crime scene. Yellow tape sealed off the lounge, investigators combed the area, and neighbors stood in silence, shaken by the violence that had erupted so close to home. The questions loomed large. Who were the shooters? Was this a personal dispute that spiraled out of control, or was it a planned attack? And perhaps most hauntingly, why did 3 young men lose their lives in the span of a few minutes, in a place where people came simply to enjoy the weekend? This was just the beginning of an investigation that would demand answers, and uncover stories of victims, survivors, and a community determined not to let fear define them. As news spread on that Sunday morning, Brooklyn awoke to shock and sorrow. Headlines quickly confirmed the grim reality. 3 men had been killed, and 8 others injured, in one of the worst mass shootings New York City had witnessed in years. Outside Taste of the City lounge, candles, flowers, and handwritten notes began to appear. Friends and family of the victims gathered in disbelief, struggling to process the senseless tragedy. For those who knew the victims, these were not just statistics or nameless faces. They were sons, brothers, friends, and neighbors whose lives had been cut short. One of the victims was just 27 years old, described by those who knew him as full of energy, someone who always brought laughter into a room. Another, 35 years old, was known as a hardworking man who had come out that night simply to enjoy himself after a long week. The third victim's details were not immediately released, as his family was still being notified. A painful reminder of how, behind every headline, there are families shattered forever. Meanwhile, the 8 survivors continued to recover in hospitals across Brooklyn. Their injuries, according to authorities, were not life-threatening. Still, many would carry scars, both physical and emotional, for the rest of their lives. Some had been celebrating birthdays, others were simply out with friends. None had expected their night to end with sirens and stretchers. For the community, the incident struck a deep chord. Crown Heights is a diverse neighborhood with a proud history of culture and resilience. Residents spoke of how this shooting felt like a step backward, especially in a year when the city had celebrated historic lows in gun violence. Community leaders called for calm but also for justice, urging anyone with information to come forward. At a press conference, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch and Mayor Eric Adams stood side by side, acknowledging both the tragedy and the need for accountability. Tisch confirmed that investigators had collected at least 36 shell casings, pointing clearly to multiple shooters. A firearm had also been recovered near the lounge, though it was too soon to know whether it belonged to one of the suspects or had been dropped by someone fleeing the scene. Detectives pored over hours of surveillance footage, not only from the lounge itself but from street cameras and nearby businesses. They interviewed witnesses who recalled the terrifying moments inside, how an argument between groups of men escalated so quickly that no one had time to react. One patron told reporters, "It was like the music stopped, and then all you could hear was gunfire. People just screamed and ran." Still, despite dozens of witnesses and extensive video, the suspects remained at large. Police made it clear that they believed more than one person had fired shots that night, suggesting this was not random but a targeted conflict that spiraled out of control. As investigators worked, the community turned to mourning. Vigils were held at Franklin Avenue, where the glow of candles lit the night sky. Local pastors, community organizers, and neighbors came together to honor the lives lost. In their speeches, there was grief, but also frustration that young men continued to die in conflicts that ended with bullets instead of dialogue. For the families of the victims, the loss was immeasurable. Parents stood in silence at memorials, friends wept openly, and many asked the question that has no easy answer: why? In the days that followed, social media filled with tributes. Pictures of the victims circulated, stories of who they were and what they meant to those around them. One was remembered for his ambition and plans for the future, another for his loyalty to friends and family. These glimpses into their lives reminded the city that behind every statistic are human beings with dreams, hopes, and unfinished stories. The NYPD, meanwhile, promised justice. Task forces specializing in gang violence and organized crime were called in to assist, though authorities stopped short of labeling the incident as gang-related. Still, with multiple shooters and a large number of shell casings, investigators knew they were dealing with something far more complex than a single act of rage. Weeks may pass before answers come. Arrests could take time. But for Crown Heights, August 17th will forever be remembered as the night a celebration turned into tragedy. The night music was replaced by the sound of gunfire, and the night 3 men's lives were cut short in a place that should have been safe. And while investigators continue to hunt for those responsible, the scars on this community, and on the families left behind, will not fade anytime soon.